Michael, thank you so much. I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to join everyone today and be able to talk about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, very a big passion point for me and for so many of our colleagues here in the Public Relations and Communications Association and really worldwide for so many of those who are working in the field. And as Michael mentioned, September is the PRCA Ethics Month, and I do want to go ahead and bring everybody's attention to a hashtag that is getting started, and that's hashtag PRCA Ethics. So if there's any content that you want to start sharing along the lines of ethical ideas, discussions, consideration points, or even anything out of this chat that we have today, I really welcome you to do that in Twitter or across social media using the hashtag PRCA Ethics. And throughout the month ahead, we're going to be sharing quite a bit of content across social media platforms about these types of topics. We actually had a conference call just yesterday on the PRCA Ethics Council to talk about the programming that we're going to be rolling out, including ours and a Twitter chat and just a host of different types of outreach efforts. I had a really nice call with one of the members of the PRCA Ethics Council, who is head of the PR Council, Kim Sample over in New York. We're very fortunate to have her as part of our group, and she and I talked about a lot of different collaborative opportunities with the agency network, not only in the US, but also abroad. So there's just, from a glass half empty or a glass half full perspective, I think we do have a lot of good news on the ethics front. There is a lot that is going well in our industry. There is a lot that so many people and so many companies are taking to heart on the ethics front. And so we're going to be sharing that and spotlighting that and putting forth those ideas as best practices. But from the standpoint of what we want to cover today, we're going to have about 30 minutes together. I think we're about, 5 or 8 minutes into it at this point. So I do want to share some ideas with you, and then we'll go straight into some Q&A. I would like to use our little group here somewhat as a focus group for some of your ideas about things you would like to see discussed in the coming month. So we want to hear from you. Feel free to use the chat function here on the Zoom call if you have some questions or ideas so that we can have some of that discussion as I'm wrapping up here in just a few minutes. But just to back up, I want to really frame some of the key issues about accountability in our field, because I think that from my vantage point, there are some really pervasive issues that we need to fix in our industry. So just to kick off, I think that in public relations, we have never had as many tools and mechanisms to be accountable as we have right now. And that's from a glass half full standpoint. We have a lot of opportunities to measure what we do. We have so many opportunities to be able to deliver value and to prove value to the C-suite and to the boardroom. And that's by virtue of technology. It's by virtue of the body of knowledge that we have amassed as an industry, and certainly the talent that we have as an industry and human capital, et cetera. But that's not all of it. What does accountability really look like? Yeah, there's campaign measurement, there's ROI, there's financial stewardship, there's that hard data piece. But I'm also going to advocate, and I think most in the PRCA would advocate, that there's also ethics. And ethics are, those are more theoretical standards. It's sort of that what we will do and what we won't do line that you draw in the sand of what line will we not cross, because crossing that line destroys trust. It's the clear promises and the hard consequences of when we fail to deliver on a promise, you know, how does that damage relationships and therefore damage our credibility? Those are some of the ethical underpinnings of what we're talking about relative to accountability. And some other things, so disclosing information, the ethics of how information is managed, the ethics of how we undertake research and development in our companies, how we undertake innovation, how we manage new technology and operational systems. Are we engaging communications ethics in all parts of that? So applied to everyday settings. To me, this is the stuff of accountability in PR that we're talking about. And this is the stuff at which too many people and too many companies in our industry are failing to follow through. And sometimes that's by choice. Sometimes it's a matter of what can we get away with? I will say that within the PRCA, I don't see that kind of behavior going on. I don't see that is, that's just not something that is part of the ethos of the organization. But sometimes too, there can be mistakes. I mean, there's human error that can enter into the picture. And I think all of us can end up making mistakes in our careers and we can fix those errors. But then sometimes there are errors where we're being more complacent than we should be. And so there's an accountability ethic toward that as well. So the industry challenge at hand really isn't our capability or our capacity to be accountable. It's really, I think the accountability factor is within us as a workforce. I think have some weak or missing links within our workforce of individuals who really don't think that accountability is important. Or worse still, I think that some individuals may not even understand what accountability is. Truly, it begins with us. It begins with a will to be accountable. And it really starts with a performance ethic of that. I want to share a little bit of a story from earlier in my career before we go to Q&A. And this will kind of kick off some of, what we're really talking about from a from an individual standpoint. When I was about 26 years old, I had an agency job, I had a corporate job, and I really wanted to go ultimately into some investor relations work. I got a job in the banking industry, and I was really excited about it. And I was very interested in how companies work. And so I got this new job in corporate communications for a bank. And as part of their training, they would send their new hires, especially if they were really new to the industry, to a Tennessee Bankers Association sort of banking 101 course, so that you could really learn about the inner workings of banking as a whole, how the Federal Reserve worked, all of that. And they taught a lot about how, just at a high level, how lending decisions are made. And they talked about the 5 C's of credit. And the 5 C's of credit are character, capacity, condition, capital, and collateral. And all 5 of those C's have to do with ability to pay back a loan, how much money that you're going to have during the course of your cash flow as a business or an individual to pay back a loan. And the question came up in the class, which of those 5 C's, character, capacity, condition, capital, or collateral, which one is the most important in the banking world to determine whether a lender should give an individual or a company a loan? And I looked around the room, and I'm surrounded mostly by people who are in the banking industry, not marketers, not PR people. And it's being taught by someone who's a banker. And I'm thinking, well, I'm surrounded by bean counters, so I'm going to give a bean counter kind of answer, or a quantitatively driven kind of answer. And my answer was, capacity, cash flow. If you don't have enough money to pay back a loan, clearly you're not going to be able to pay it. So that has to be the biggest consideration. And the instructor looked at me and said, no, capacity is actually not the most important consideration in granting someone a loan. Character. Character is always going to be the most important consideration to undertake for any lender in determining whether someone should be given a loan or not. Because character is all about honesty and integrity and whether they have any intention of paying that loan back. They could have all the money in the world to repay a loan, but if they don't have the integrity and the honesty to pay it back and the intention to pay it back, you're never going to see that money again. So I found that very interesting. And as I've gone through my career, I've often thought the bankers have it figured out. The bean counters have it figured out, how important character is to their operational decisions. They have it codified in lending practice. Do we in public relations and in our ethical constructs have it codified in our practice? So that's a bit of my question that I'm asking today. And when we talk about accountability, really, aren't we talking about character? I think that character in this day and age, I think sometimes it sounds quaint. Sometimes it sounds passé, or even like it's a political type of term or too judgmental. But in today's chat, I'm really here to make a case that unless our industry takes a much harder look at character and really undertakes that subject anew, as we look at how we're operating as an industry, we're looking at the development of cultures within our industry of non-accountability, of some individuals in our industry who have not necessarily any intention of following a code of ethics. And that has the potential to destroy our industry in a lot of different ways. The credibility of our industry, the credibility of those working within it. And it has the potential to really take us backward as an industry. And that's something that we, in my view, have to fight against very, very carefully and with intention. So before we go to Q&A here, what's the call to action? I guess a few last thoughts here. As an industry, and as we're going into Ethics Month in September, my call to action is that we make ethical and accountable culture building in the PR industry our mantra. Okay, and that starts with education first, but it doesn't stop with education. It only starts with education. It proceeds from education and goes on to applying what we learn every day in the work that we do. And it doesn't stop with applying what we learn. It continues on toward processes of compliance with codes of ethics and with ethical accountability and consequences for non-compliance and a knowledge that, oh, there is a consequence for non-compliance of an ethics code. And therein you have, some really nice cycles of ideally reinforced, consistent, positive behaviors of within the industry that can then take hold. And in fact, I think those have very much taken hold within the PRCA. I think it's the reason the PRCA is, in my view, the industry leader from an association standpoint, because it espouses those virtues of not just education, because I think some associations are saying education on ethics is the end all be all, and that's where it stops. But in my view, it needs to go many steps further. So that's how we build a culture of accountability, and that's how we build a reputation for accountability. And that's, I think, how we are going to build a cross-functional sense of respect for public relations and for what we do and who we are. So with that said, I would love to open it up for questions or comments, or as we go into Ethics Month, any thoughts from anyone as to elements of this that they would like to see in some of our programming. So if there's anyone who wants to jump off here with a question, or Michael, if anyone has put anything in chat.
Right, Beth, can I just follow up on the points? For those who don't know me, I'm Steve. I'm the Membership and Partnership Director. It's interesting in the UK because the process we go through for bringing in new members, in most cases up until lately, would be to go in their offices, to sit down with the sort of key directors, often CEO, MD, and in visiting the offices, you get a feel for the character of the firm, and then on top of that, you have the different layers of, well, signing up to our codes of conduct, paying a membership fee. So these different layers all sort of add up to creating understanding the character of an organization. But we're now in a world where human interaction is now replaced with phone calls, Zoom calls. And it's an interesting dynamic in what that future of human interactivity is likely to be. We're also helped in the UK because we're a very small country. It is quite easy for me to get in a train and go to Manchester or Glasgow and do these meetings. But other parts of the world, which are massively bigger than the United Kingdom, that sort of face-to-face interaction is never that easy. It's more of a comment, but also a question of what are that sort of future dynamic of the ascertaining character is likely to be using online tools like Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Well, from my vantage, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Oh, sure. I was just going to, make the comment that, I mean, ultimately, there are two factors, I think, in determining character. Number one, the initial factor that we have to go on is what people say, right? How they represent themselves and how they articulate their values, and whether that's through a Twitter feed or whether that's through a job interview or whether that's through just conversations or how you get to know someone formally or informally over time. And that can be through networking. It can be through just all different ways of personal interaction. So it's what a person says or it's what a company says. It's their, the messaging that they're putting forward. And then there's what someone does. It's their actions, it's their behaviors. And, we talk a lot nowadays about the say, do, disconnect. There are these massive issues, and this is really at the heart of the challenges and the concerns at hand within the industry, that all too often we have a situation where the public relations function is being not just asked, but told to put forward a message that the PR function knows full well is not indicative of the action and the behavior of the management team. They are basically being asked in some cases to put forward a message that perhaps is aspirational as opposed to accurate to the policy and to the behavior, okay? So that is a non-accountable messaging behavior, I think. And I think that is a practice within the industry as a whole that we need to start calling out in a much more decisive and specific way. So when we talk about, networking and ways to get to know people and ways to get to know character and ways to get to, I think there are those two pieces of it. It's learning what people are saying as a representation of their values, but also looking very carefully at what they're doing and understanding that if there is a disconnect between behavior and messaging, then an individual or a company has a problem.
And I think that the question of character is a really interesting one in the sense of how do we define that? So you've got the controversial person, and then you've got the ethical, morals sort of position. And I think that's the challenge, is for that definition between, like, it is okay if someone is controversial. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's unethical as well. I thought of getting your view on that, Mary Beth, on how do you make that distinction. So I think especially on Twitter and these sort of platforms where conversation can just sort of escalate and lose the focus, how can you put that into real sort of clarity?
Yeah, so are you talking about companies that may work in industries that some people find controversial, like it could be the tobacco industry, or it could be a political candidate that is out of favor with a large segment of the population,
Yeah.
or that people find objectionable?
Yeah, absolutely. You've got individuals, if that's from athletes, that's to politicians, who are strictly quite controversial and very, very splitting in terms of are they a moral person that is viewed, but that's such a subjective view on that. And so I think that's an area that there's a lot of grey area in that area, especially for the PR world, to make that decision of if you're going to represent that person or work for that person.
Right. Well, I think that is, and I hope my internet is not getting a little unstable, and I don't know whether, I think it's starting to cut out just a little bit, and I apologize. But I have a question. I think that it's a consistency factor as well. I think that there is always going to be the potential for some level of disagreement about whether a certain stance on an issue is the right stance or correct, and some that as a values question, okay? And people can take that view. I mean, it's a matter of opinion. But where we start getting into dicey territories, when a company or an individual or a brand starts manipulating facts, or starts manipulating in such a way that clearly is at a disservice to factual public information. And I think that is a very big part of where the PRCA Code of Ethics comes into play, managing factual information and being sure that factual information is always upheld, even within the context of advocating for an idea that may be driven. So there can be a balancing of that, even for companies that are in industries that some people may oppose for whatever reason. So I think, and I've worked for companies that have had opposition to them. You've been in this business long enough, and certainly if you've worked in the agency realm, you're going to encounter working for companies that have some type of opposition on stated moral grounds. It doesn't mean that you're unethical just because you've chosen to work for a company that has opposition to it. It's the manner in which you carry forward your job, and it's the manner that you balance the public interest in how you communicate and represent that company, and that you are not placing public safety, public well-being at the short end of the stick when you are representing that company or that interest. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And what would your advice be for an entry-level, a mid-level person who is going into an organization, and they're seeing things that are potentially very unethical? But if the organization is a part of an organization, it isn't a part of the PRCA, as an example, where they can be held more accountable, what can they do to call out actions with the fear as well of potentially their own career at stake?
Certainly, I think that for a new professional who does not have the benefit of career experience on their side to be able to fall back on and to be able to reference and just have that confidence built in by virtue of that experience, it can be a very difficult road to when you're confronted with something that you just inherently know is wrong, or that you inherently know is not on the up and up. I think that this is where the power of the PRCA and other groups, whether it's a chamber of commerce or whether it's other kinds of networks that are brought into someone's professional circle, are so important. And the mentoring relationships are very, and why it's so important for new professionals and those in particular who are within 5 years of experience or less in the field, for them to have a mentor, and for mentorship to be a very big part of what companies offer to entry-level professionals. But the entry-level hires are sometimes going to have to be very purposeful about cultivating those relationships themselves, especially if the company just doesn't offer that up to them. Because if they are encountering behaviors that they find questionable and they want to be able to voice that, they may need some coaching from the sidelines on how to do that in a way that is not going to put their job at jeopardy, or is not going to be impolitic, or that is not going to be bull in a china shop, or be viewed as such, and just place them at an inherent disadvantage. I've been in the trenches for a pretty long time now, in general, in the field, but certainly in the area of public advocacy and activism in the area of calling out unethical conduct. And it is a very difficult undertaking, because you're in a position of calling out individuals or calling out a company, and then you are going to be in a position of a counterattack more than likely as part of that. So this is not something to undertake lightly. It's a very difficult type of undertaking. So you really need to have that basis of experience, and also just having those relationships, those advisors, individuals who you trust and whose counsel you can rely on for, and it doesn't matter whether you have only 5 years of experience or 25 years. I think still having good colleagues and those who can help advise you can be very important in that process.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I'd be interested to get your take on, so at your organization, is there any systems or things that you have in place as well to ensure that those standards are always maintained, that potentially some other agencies can also refer to, that they can take on?
Well, are you talking about in terms of a private company or a PR firm having systems in place?
Yes, for a PR agency, what sort of systems in place? Is there a way for people to make a very any serious complaints, or is there a monthly or also quarterly catch up to discuss these sort of things? Always self-check a little bit to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing to do.
Well, I think that it goes back to the theme of today's chat, and that's culture. The idea of either you're going to have a culture of accountability or a culture of non-accountability, and really drawing that line in the sand. And this is a CEO decision. This is a management level team decision to say, we are going to have in this company, and these are the steps we're going to take. And that's something that I would encourage all agency leaders and management leaders to be very purposeful about undertaking in a way that is well communicated within their team structure, and that is clear for their team members to be able to engage if they see something or they experience something that is troubling. It could be sexual harassment whether it's by a coworker or by a client, which actually happens far more often than I think a lot of people understand. Or other types of behavior. It doesn't have to be sexual harassment. It could be just something else that doesn't feel proper, especially for a new professional. And of course, we know that our industry is very female dominated. So, you have many young women out there who are in a posture within the field where they can very easily be in a position of feeling very much at a disadvantage. So it's important to have systems in place and a culture of support where they feel like they can voice concern, be supported, and not feel like they are going to be thrust into a culture of retribution and retaliation. I will say that on the misinterpreted platform that Fletcher PR, the agency that I'm part of in Knoxville, Tennessee, is part of, we are having a Twitter chat next week on Tuesday with one of my colleagues, Susan Hart, and she is we're going to be, this is co-sponsored with PRCA as well, to talk about reporting misconduct and fighting retaliation. So this very topic is going to be coming up next week as part of Ethics Month on September 1st. So really kicking off Ethics Month on that topic. And I think that we will be touching on this idea of having systems in place so that there is a support structure for being able to speak up.
Fantastic. Well, Mary Beth, we've already run out of time, sadly, but as usual, it was a really enjoyable, very engaging discussion. So thank you so much for your time. And as you mentioned, for everyone, keep an eye out on Twitter, on the website as well for a whole bunch of activity in regards to Ethics Month.